As I said earlier, Jacob is probably one of my all-time favorite characters of the Bible. Not because he was particularly heroic or strong or even a figure of great moral character. In fact, quite the opposite. He was a con man, a trickster, a liar, a conniving manipulator of those around him. He was not a particular picture of the family values espoused by some these days. In fact, he was the embodiment of what we might call these days an anti-hero. Now, I love the story of Jacob, not because he was an embodiment of faithfulness and moral righteousness, but because he was so profoundly human. The Hebrew Scriptures, what we call the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, are filled with such characters of very fallible protagonists, from the doubting, laughing Sarah to Jonah, who runs away from God, to even King David, who's called the most beloved of God, who steals another man's wife and arranges her husband's death. The so-called great heroes of the Bible we read about in Sunday school or might hear on Sunday morning are not so great, but most especially stories of very human beings, fallible and imperfect. Now, it's the genius of the Hebrew Scriptures that these very human stories become the testament for how God works in the world, becomes a witness to this essential truth, that God's grace breaks in among people who are not perfect. God's grace breaks into people who are not morally upright. God's grace shows up in the most least likely, most fallible human beings you can imagine, and Jacob is the prime example. And as Mary referred to, it starts at birth with his twin brother Esau, twins who in no way look like each other. Esau comes out first from the room, covered, it is said in the story, with red hair that covered his whole body, and it was kind of like a hairy cloak. And that's how he got his name. Esau is the word for hairy cloak. It also refers that his nickname, in many ways, was Red. Jacob follows, holding on to the Esau's heel. And that's how Jacob got his name. That's what it literally means, heel grabber. A good descriptor of a lifetime of grifting, if you will. These two twins could not be any different. And thus begins the oldest, earliest story of sibling rivalry ever recounted in human history. Esau, firstborn, beloved of his father Isaac, a heroic hunter, I imagine, big and burly, who brought meat to his family. A man's man, right? Jacob, secondborn, the apple of his mother's eye, who I imagine is more diminutive, rather spend time in the safety of the tents. And the family dynamic of this family was from the start, as we say these days, was dysfunctional, right? We can all relate to family dysfunction. If you had a picture of family dysfunction in the dictionary, there would be Isaac and Esau and Jacob. And as the story unfolds, Jacob, as Mary referred, cons his brother Esau out of his birthright for a bowl of stew. Esau doesn't come across very bright in this story, right? Jacob lies and tricks his blind father to bless him rather than his own father. And the result, unsurprisingly, is Esau threatens to kill Jacob. And at the urging of his mother, Jacob does what Jacob does best. He runs away as fast as he can. And as he runs away to his uncle's lands, where as he runs that way, filled with fear and uncertainty, hoisted by his own petard, if you will, that is the first time God's grace breaks in. As he's traveling, scared and frightened and alone, he has a dream. And in this dream, he sees this ladder, where all of us have heard of Jacob's ladder, where angels go up and down, a vision in many ways of the connections between heaven and earth, a connection to God's presence in the world. So Jacob, the trickster, the con man, the thief of birthrights, one of the least spiritual persons you could imagine, has an experience of God. God is there in his fear, in his regret, in his running away. The story goes that when he arrives at his uncle's tents, he meets his match in his uncle Laban, a con man himself, who in his own right tricks Jacob into working for him for 14 years in order for him to marry his 2 daughters. Even in the midst of that, Jacob grows and prospers in wealth and in children. But again, wanting to get out underneath his father-in-law, Laban's control, Laban's manipulation, Jacob does what Jacob does best. He runs away as fast as he can. So nowhere else to go, he decides to head home. And as he's traveling, he gets word that Esau is coming to him with 400 men. Fearing the retribution he anticipates is coming, actually in the story, he sends a bribe to Esau, much of his wealth, hoping to save his life. And the night before they are to meet happens the second moment grace breaks into Jacob's life. He wrestles an angel all night long. And he's enchanged by this encounter with this angel, this grace. He's wounded permanently with a limp, and even named differently. He is called Israel, which means those who wrestle with God. He has an experience, a wrestling with the love and mercy of God that changes him, and the truth is, grace changes us. Grace, even, I will say, wounds us as we wrestle with God. And then comes the moment we read this morning. Fearing for his life, fearing for his family, he lines them up and he goes before them and bows down 7 times to brother Esau. And here's Esau, everything, he's been cheated by his brother, he's been lied to by his brother, he's always had this brother who's doing all this heel-grabbing, and in this moment, when that brother deserves punishment for all his misdeeds, what happens? It's a great line. His brother runs to him and embraces him and kisses him, and they weep. Reminds me of a story Jesus told of a prodigal son and a father, right? Great, same kind of line shows up. The father with his prodigal son who's hurt him runs to him, embraces him, welcomes him It is a profound moment of grace offered by Esau. And in that moment, Jacob, the con man, the liar, the thief of birthrights, says to this brother who he has struggled with his whole life, a powerful line. Did y'all notice it? For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. For seeing your face, this brother he has abused and cheated and lied to, but to see his brother's face is to see the face of God. And the brother he's long wronged his whole life, a lifetime of family dysfunction, yet he sees the face of God in that moment of grace. God's grace breaks in this story of fallible human beings like all of us, each in our own ways, broken and fallible, hurting ourselves, hurting others. Broken even as we might have moments in which we wrestle with God, somehow grace breaks in and we can see the face of God. My best friend in seminary was Harv. He and his wife and daughter were like family to me the years I was in seminary. Even as close as we were, and we were really close, hung out quite a bit. He did drop out of seminary for reasons I'll make clear, but we were very, very close, like brothers. Even as we were that close, I did not know or had not noticed that Harv was an alcoholic. There were signs I could see, but you just don't pay attention. Anyone who might know an alcoholic, it has often been hidden. He hid it. He lied about it in many ways. He conned us all, most especially himself. And I didn't know he was an alcoholic until he went into treatment. He invited me to come to the AA meeting for his 1-year anniversary. You get a chip, it's kind of called a sober birthday. And I had never ever been to an AA meeting, not sure what to expect or what was going to happen. And what I witnessed was one of the most powerful and deeply spiritual things I have ever seen. A group in a circle of profoundly fallible human beings, broken, sharing these heart-rending, tragic stories of dysfunction, of hurting themselves, of hurting their families, of hurting their loved ones. They had lied and conned everyone around them, and most especially themselves. And I must tell you, it was physically painful to hear those stories, those wrenching stories. But something profound was happening in their vulnerability of sharing, in their quiet, silent acceptance and mercy. That circle of addicts listened to each other and they witnessed to the grace breaking in. In the moments, these deeply wounded people, when they realized they could not save themselves, it was only by the grace of God. And that every day they needed that grace to stay sober each and every moment. I saw something. The faces of those addicts. I saw the face of God. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.